Okay. So tonight I want to talk about knowing, feeling, and seeing and hearing. And this will be fairly simple, but I want you to really see. Most of you will resonate on a few of these things. I could go around the room and go, this is your strength, this is your strength, this is your strength. But hopefully you'll see it. But like I said, you'll probably overlap in a few of these. And so I'll start with the feeler. So a feeler is generally the heart in a room. They feel God's emotions in an unprecedented way. You'll see these kind of people crying in a service, and they don't have anything to cry about, right? They're feeling the presence of God, or they're feeling somebody else's pain, and they start crying. And this isn't just women. This is men as well. This happened to me for a season where it seemed like wherever I would sit, I would just start bawling, and I was like, okay, God, why am I crying? Are you breaking me of something? I assumed it was me, because that's what I always do. I assume, well, if I'm feeling something, I'm going to check with me first. But then it just kept happening over and over and over again. And then there was a time where there was a team of people lined up, and the pastor was praying for them, and I was just standing behind them. And I could feel, and it would be like I'd stand behind one person, and it would feel one way, and then it would feel another way, and then it was like excruciating pain. And then another time where this happened, and I was interceding, I should say, while the other person was praying. And then there was another time, there was a relative of mine that came to church for the first time, and I knew they were carrying a lot of stuff. They were afraid to go up front. And so I actually held the person's hand, brought them up, and then a person started prophesying over this person, and it was like completely accurate, of course, and they've never met this person. And I'm like, part of me started laughing. Well, then one of my other relatives came up, and so there was two of us, and then the person that was being prayed for, and I just felt like the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. It was as if all of my insides like ate themselves, and it's excruciating. And I bent over, and it's like most of you intercessors experience this frequently when they go into travail. And I just started praying in tongues, and I was literally feeling the person's pain as they were getting delivered, and then it like lasted for a while. So I was able to actually go up to the person and say to them, and here's the point of being a feeler, right? I was able to go up to them and say, hey, I have no idea what you've literally been through, but I felt, this is what I felt, and I imagine this is a little bit of what you felt. Where a lot of times feelers make the mistake of going, oh, I felt all your pain, I know exactly what you're going through. And that's the thing, is you never know what someone else has gone through, even if you went through the exact same experience. So that, that's a good key. But that's part of what happens when you are a feeler. So emotions are signals to what is going on. And a lot of times, you could walk into this room and you may feel a feeling different when you come in than when you were outside. Same with when you go to somebody's house. I've walked into people's house, and all of a sudden I feel this anger and rage, and I'm like, where is this coming from? And these are like the nicest Christian couple you've ever met, right? Big house, everything you could ever want in life, right? And then it hits me. I'm like, well, this isn't me. And so I just, in my head, pray in the Spirit. It lifts, and I realize, there's something going on with the family. And then, so that's when it's a key for me to start asking the Lord, well, how can I pray for them, right? Now, if I was already angry and upset and came there, that's a whole different story. But literally, I hadn't felt any anger that whole day. As soon as I sit on their couch, it was just like, it just hits me, and I'm having this like, so those are keys. Feelers can sense what's going on in a physical environment, okay? And for some people, if you were like, oh, I'm not a feeler, I don't feel anything, this is something you can actually just practice. And for men, if a man isn't a feeler, because I used to do these classes where we'd help men to process feelings and deal with abuse, and you'd ask men, tell me we had a list of like 100 feeling words, and we go, all right, so tell me all the feelings that you know, and they'd be like, mad, glad, happy, rage, anger, and they were all derivatives of anger, but they couldn't seem to say like disrespected, unloved, uncared. They couldn't, because it's not something that most men are taught. So that's part of, sometimes men feel feel manifestations of different feelings, but don't even realize it's not theirs. They just take it on as if it's their own. So some strengths of feelers, like I said, they experience God's emotions. Okay, His emotions are not the same as ours. It's like when, in the Old Testament, when things are getting conquered and people are like, oh God, He's such a mean, angry guy. It's like, no, it was love. It had nothing to do with anger. But that's how we interpret things. And that's why it's really important when, to resolve things, to not have bitterness, to not have unforgiveness. Really, really important. Another strength is picking up on spiritual moments most people miss. And this is where you'll meet the person who says, well, I don't feel anything. I have no idea why that person over there is shaking. That person's on the floor. That person's feeling the fire of God, because feelers tend to feel things more. I mean, hence the name, right? Where other people are just like, I feel nothing here. It feels dead, right? Okay. Other strengths of feelers, they generally have power encounters when they're reading the Word of God. And so many times feelers are the kind of people who don't want to leave their own house because they just don't want to feel all this stuff. They don't want to feel the regional stuff. They don't want to feel stuff when they go places. So they'll just stay home. But many times that's where they have powerful encounters as they're reading the Word of God. And by an encounter, I mean they really start engaging with the heart of God. They start feeling His love for themselves, for other people, and then those can really be powerful times of intercessions. Okay? Weaknesses of a feeler. I can tell you millions of these because these are kind of the ones that I really want to see, like, feelers get healed in a sense. And there's a lot of belief systems that go with each of these that that are in a sense things that you learn in childhood that need to be kind of crushed. But here are a few of the weaknesses. Difficulty functioning when things don't feel right. I hear this all the time where it's like, oh, something's off today, or I just don't feel right. I'm depressed, or I'm feeling anxiety, or you'll hear those things from feelers. And you guys hearing this, one of the things you can do to help feelers is ask them questions. Just by asking them, when did this start? How long has this been going on? And sometimes if they have clinical depression, they've been depressed for like the last 6 years, that's not what I'm talking about. But that could also be a feeler who's partnered with it and accepted it as kind of their thing. But what I'm talking about is, they have a bad day at work and all these different things, and you can even hear the language as they talk. They'll use that. But one of the weaknesses is many times a feeler who hasn't like grown enough, is probably the best way I could say it, is they're sick a lot. Because they're like the antenna that picks up everything in the room, and then they just assume it's them, if that makes any sense. Another weakness from the other side is they overvalue what they feel and then leave others behind, okay? And you'll find this a lot with each of these different aspects, is they overvalue their experience. And you'll hear the I, right? They also undervalue feelings and dismiss them without recognizing God is in it. In the process as they're growing, they'll feel these things. They'll just not assume God has anything to do with it. I know one lady who was literally, she cut like everything out of her diet because she was overweight. She couldn't lose weight no matter what she did. And literally she tried every diet, everything. She'd lose maybe 5-10 pounds, but was like chronically ill. And this is like a 30-something-year-old woman. And so tried every diet, cut everything out, and then slowly started putting things back into her diet. And didn't realize there's a whole, and she understood the prophetic, but didn't understand who she really was. And as she started implementing things, she'd be like, well, I can't eat this. And then all of a sudden 2 weeks later, oh, I can eat this. It's actually this food. And it's almost like a craziness in the process where it's like that's one part of the problem, the food. But the other part is she's literally picking up what's going on with her daughters, what's going on with her husband, what's going on at work, and wasn't able to discern all that. And as she started to discern, all this stuff isn't mine, only some of it, then she was like, oh, this food doesn't, I can eat pizza, which would make her sick, in the past. But yeah, because she was picking up other things that had nothing to do with the food. So it was like a wide kind of variety of things. Other weaknesses of feelers. You'll hear the phrase, well, I don't want to change, how I am. And in a sense, they're so, like the thing I described where I was like bent over in excruciating pain, I wouldn't want to experience that on a regular basis. And when I probably the first 10 years of being saved, I would walk into a room, I would know who's dangerous, I would know, I didn't have the language I have now, I didn't have the demonic language and all those kind of things, but I'd know who was safe, who was dangerous, I could feel what was going on in the room to the point where I didn't want to go to a church. I didn't want to go to many places because it was just overwhelming. And it's almost like having like a sixth sense where you're like, okay, is that person going to attack me? Is that person? I mean, imagine everywhere you went, and women can relate to this usually more than men. It's like, okay, am I safe? It's dark out, what's going on? That's how I felt a lot of times. But you can actually turn that down so it's not so intense. But you will hear some feelers say, well, I don't want to ever turn this down because God gave me this, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then they're the ones that are getting checked into the hospital, and, and they do have the other side. They have the really good experience as well, but they don't know that it can be managed. And I always say with discernment or with this gift, if you have this really, really strongly, it will manage you if you don't manage it, okay? And you see this a lot of times, people who've come out of the occult, they tend to react to stuff that was in their past more strongly than someone who's not, because they know what it feels like, right? And so they see it and they're like, I'm gonna get you, right? Instead of like compassion and mercy. Okay? How can you guys relate to feelers, even if you are one? Is value how they're feeling. Even if you're sitting there going, oh, this again, have compassion and mercy. Talk to them, because sometimes you just talking to them and helping them process their emotions will help them in their freedom. And I've seen, a friend of mine who is not a feeler at all has helped her really, really strong feeler friend who's literally like been hospitalized with anxiety and you name it, by just asking questions and having compassion and mercy. Even though sometimes she's just like, can't you see you have a strong gift of discernment and a strong feeler gift? Okay? So don't roll your eyes at them. So value their feelings, ask them what they are feeling, and then help them partner with their feelings and release their emotion. Because that's the key is, as you guys, most of you have probably experienced this, when you have a moment of intercession, you're praying in the spirit for somebody, and then all of a sudden it's just gone. This doesn't happen to me that often, but when it does, where I'll feel some kind of feeling, I'm just like, oh God, I don't want to, how long is this going to take? Because it can be hours if you pray for someone, especially if you pray in English. So that's another key, is pray in the Spirit. It's generally much quicker, when you do that. Just pray in the Spirit and you'll feel it leave. And it doesn't matter when you have those moments of intercession, whether you know who it is or not. A lot of times if you have a knower, and we'll talk about that next, if you have a knower, you'll just know who it is. But many times you won't, and it doesn't matter whether you know who it is or not, okay? A couple ways to grow as a feeler. Make sure you anchor yourself in who God is. Identity is always a key in everything, and we're always growing in our identity in Jesus. Sometimes we take a step back, which is okay, but just anchor yourself in who God is. And surround yourself with people who understand this, who can ask you these questions. That's really important. And then one of the biggest keys, that I know this is really basic and simple, but most people forget it, is ask God why you're feeling that way. Because a lot of people don't do that. They're just like, They assume, well, this has happened before, so this is why it is, and they don't bother to just go, Lord, why is this happening? Why am I feeling this way? Where is this coming from? And then the other part, as I said before, in intercession, pray in the Spirit until it lifts, or until you feel joy, until you feel peace. Depending on who you are and how you feel, those are the kind of the things that you'll start to feel. And then the other part is celebrate the positive moments, okay? Because this isn't just like a burden. You're not just a burden bearer. There's the positive moments as well. And that's the part of, if a feeler is always just used to the negative stuff, they won't celebrate the positive stuff. They'll just be stuck in the negative, okay? Really, really important. And some people, depending on who you are, they'll feel it on kids more than they do adults, vice versa, adults more than kids. Some of it's based on what you've experienced. If you had trauma as a kid, many times that trauma, once you get healed, you're really going to sense from somebody else what you have. And that's the other part, is just in the process of noticing patterns. If you feel something on someone, don't just jump to a conclusion. Start asking the Lord, well, why is this here? Was this something done to the person, or is it something they did to someone else? Because a lot of time with discernment, people see the negative thing, feel the negative thing, and they just assume this person's done something. They don't tend to go, I'll just use an example. I felt strong perversion on this person, and I didn't want, my body was like, don't touch this person, run away. And then, as I kept praying into it, I realized this is something that was done to the person. This wasn't something that they intentionally partnered with, okay? So that's the part of having grace and mercy, where, 15 years ago, I would have just been like, that person is a predator or whatever, because they have perversion on them, okay? So that's, in a nutshell, kind of the feeler. There's a lot more I could say, but I just want to give you guys little pieces of this, okay? So the next one I'm going to talk about is the knower, okay? You've heard me talk about perception, intuition. This is really what a knower is. They're intuitive, okay? Very, very intuitive. God communicates through their strong sense. Many times their ability is to discern an outcome, which I would say is different than getting a prophetic word or having, and it's hard for me not to say no. Many times these people will just be like, I know this is going to happen, and they're so sure of it, they're so confident as they've matured in this part of the prophetic, that it'll come true. And it's not, to me, it's not something that just all of a sudden changes. It's I know I'm going to move this summer, right? They may not have any of the details, but they know this is going to happen. And it's that thing where God gives you that little piece of it, and it's like an impression, if that makes any sense, versus hearing God say, you are going to move this summer. It's it's a knowing, it's intuition. And it's the same way when they look at someone, they'll just know something is off. And they don't necessarily know what it is. And then as they start praying, and this happens to me all the time, I'll pray and ask God, well, why is this off in this person? What is that? Because sometimes I feel it, but sometimes I know it, and I don't usually get the answer right away. And I don't usually hear a response. It's a week later, 3 hours later, I just know it's this. Or many times what God does for me is shows me a picture or reminds me of somebody else that I know who had the same issue and who's been healed from it. And so then I know, and that's how the patterns work for me, okay? So they're intuitive. God communicates through the strong sense and their ability to discern the outcome, in the future. Some strengths of a knower: they are like bulldozers. They can push through obvious barriers that other people generally cannot. There's a book called Grit, and it's all about basically determination no matter what, and just pushing through all kinds of stuff. But that's really what knowers have, is they have grit, they have a toughness, a determination. Barriers, what's that? They just blast right through it. They're commonly right about the way something will turn out. And again, this isn't somebody giving you a word that you're going to minister in the land of, the super friends, 10 years from now. This is like where it could change if you don't go to the land of super friends, right? This is like something that will actually happen. Once they encounter the truth of God, little will stop them. And this is where, it's a real positive. Once, if you have friends like that and you can grab a hold of them and go with them, that's where it is a lot of fun, but it can be scary for people because they don't have the same inclination that it's going to turn out the way. That's where relationship is really important. My wife, she's never called me crazy, but I can tell you there's things I say to her that she just looks at me and I know she wants to roll her eyes. But after 13 years of marriage, she's seen it happen enough and knows that these things actually come true, that she just goes, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about, but thank you for telling me. And then when it comes true, it actually helps her because she's ready for it. I was in a church position, and I knew 8 months before was out of that position that it was going to happen. And I told my wife in advance, and that was one of those things she just went, really? Like, why? And I was like, well, I'm not going to go into why. Because I was careful what I even said to my wife because I didn't want to taint her view of different things. I did tell her a little bit, but I literally knew 8 months in advance. And if I look back, there was signs even before that I didn't realize were also signs of that happening. So those are kind of fun things. It makes when things happen that are out of your control or whatever, however you would word that, it does make things a little bit easier, but it doesn't make them completely easy because you still have to process it emotionally, right? Some weaknesses of knowers. They don't tend to value how other people hear from God, okay? They tend to be called arrogant, proud, cocky, however you want to label those things, you know what I mean. They tend to be the person, in the room that they don't see the confidence, they see pride and arrogance. And generally it's it's their insecurity that they're projecting on somebody. They're usually project that onto a knower. So knowers really need to walk in being humble and having mercy, and really learning how to communicate what they know. Because when you just tell someone, well, I know this is going to happen, it doesn't matter if it comes true or not, because for the other person, because they're like, well, I don't get it. What are you talking about? You have to bring people along slowly. So they don't tend to value how other people hear from God. They overvalue their knowing and they leave others behind. And then here's a big one. Many times they miss when God changes direction. Okay? They miss when God changes direction. Here are some keys how to relate to a knower. They rarely use the word God said or I feel. And you'll hear me when I train people in the prophetic, I tell them don't ever say the Lord says or God says or Jesus says, because if you are speaking on behalf of the Lord, it'll be evident by your words. Okay? Now, if God says to you, I want you to say it just like this. Like when you read the Old Testament, this is the word of the Lord, and they actually say this, right? Because you read, this is what God says, and then they repeat, God says, da-da-da-da-da, right? So if God actually communicates to you, I want you to say, Bob, God says, then do it like that. But and the reason I push so strongly back on this is I was using the 1980s as a reference point, but there were many prophets who the Lord says, brother, sister, and they use this language that is just like, it kind of takes away from the word. So that's my personal opinion, but you will not hear knowers use the word God said very often, okay? Or the Lord says, or any of that kind of stuff. They'll just tell you straight up. Another way you can relate to a knower, value their strong sense, okay? And then while you're valuing them, ask them questions, because generally when you ask them questions, the knowers that operate in revelation, stuff will come out of them that they don't even know is there. Okay? This is why, when somebody's ministering and then you ask that minister a question, oftentimes they will say stuff that it's just revelation coming out of them. And they're just kind of like, what did I just say? Because that's how, strong knowers are. Okay? The other thing you can do to relate to them is help them communicate by asking, like I said, good questions. But don't just ask them one, ask them two, because many times they go, I don't know. Because they're so used to getting an impression or an answer to something they asked in the past that just keep asking them questions. And actually you'll see some of them will be irritated by that, but it actually does help them. Okay? How to grow as a knower? Like I said, don't believe the lie that you're not spiritual. Many knowers believe that they are not spiritual. They believe that, everybody else hears from God better. I don't manifest like the next person. You'll hear those kind of things from knowers because, many times they don't feel like they're spiritual. They'll read the word. Maybe they're not feeling or sensing anything in those moments. But like I said, if you're a knower, don't believe the lie that you're not spiritual. Okay? Another way to grow as a knower, trust your gut and build a history with God. And this is where most knowers don't write things down, but this is where it's really important to write your experiences down. This is where it helped me doing life coaching and counseling, because I'd have somebody sit in front of me and I'd be like, well, this guy's obviously got a lot of anger, right? And it was like, but where is it coming from? And it's like, well, I had this same client, 5 weeks ago who had the same issue, and I would see the patterns that I would know, well, this is what it was. He experienced this. But that's the part, is as you develop these patterns, you begin to know, what you're seeing, what you're, sensing, all that kind of stuff. So trust your gut and build a history with God. And then, as I've kind of said this before, but in a more direct way, learn to articulate what you know. Okay? That's huge for you knowers, is communicate in a way that makes sense. And that's where, you get with some feelers that'll be just like, everything is yay, oh yay, and they're all excited. And it's just kind of like, for a knower, they're just kind of like, yeah, let's cut to the chase, right? Let's get right to the bottom line. That's great that you're happy, but get to the bottom line. I'm happy too. What are you trying to say, right? And that's where it's like, knowers need to lighten up. And I'll be honest, many knowers deal with anger and frustration and, where they would be tend to be more controlling than, say, a feeler would be. Although feelers would control in a different way. But yeah, so you kind of get the point. And I would put perception in there. Like I said before, intuition. There's just things that if you say to them, well, did you hear God say this to you? Like, did you hear a voice inside your head say this? And they would be like, no. And that's where knowers can really lower themselves, because if they're around someone who hears the Lord really well, they'll start to feel like, well, I don't hear the Lord. And I saw this with the youth, some of the knowers that were in the group. They didn't hear from the Lord at all, but they would know, spot on, accurately what was going on with people, with environments, and it was an impression that they would have. So now let's move to hearers, okay? So we're talking about prophetic, different personalities, and this is the hearer. They freely hear God speaking, okay? This can be external, it can be internal. One of the best ways they learn is by listening, which would make sense because they're a hearer. They believe the voice of God changes everything. So when they're around a knower, they're just kind of like, what? I hear from the Lord, And then they generally have a deep history of hearing God, and that's where they recognize this is actually God speaking. They work independently And generally, the healthy ones keep to the word that they've heard. And, well, I won't get there yet, but I'll come back to that. They do hear God in a unique way. Most of them can pinpoint the first time they heard from God. They can go back, it was when I was 7 years old, or it was when I was 5. And there may be a lapse where they're not hearing from God, but they can generally point back to where they heard, which does build confidence. Big weaknesses of hearers. They don't tend to see the details of a big picture. They tend to cloud the message with the messenger. Sometimes they can be really independent and they have a lack of team thinking. As an immature hearer will tell you everything they've heard, ever, like the first time you meet them. It's kind of like the person who's experienced lots of abuse, and the first time you're sitting down with coffee, well, when I was 5, this happened to me, and this happened to me, and this happened to me, and you're just like, okay, enough, right? They just haven't gotten healthy yet. So that's one of the weaknesses of the hearer. They'll literally tell you everything they've heard, because what they're trying to do is they're not trying to convince you that they hear from God. They're trying to convince themselves. And that's why people, I would say, throw up on other people. And that's the part, is as that maturity starts to come, they don't have to tell everybody everything. Okay? Ways to relate to a hearer. When you're working with them, help them pinpoint the one thing that God is highlighting versus the last 2 weeks of everything they've heard. Help them pinpoint what God is highlighting. As a seer, a lot of times I'll ask them, okay, look at what God just said to you, and literally ask him to highlight some way what you've just heard, all these different things. And many times that really helps them, because they'll, in a sense, see what they heard and know that's what I need to focus on. This is really big. Hearers need to write down what they hear, journal it, write it down. And again, most folks don't journal. It's a habit. It takes practice. It takes discipline. Even if you just write it in your notes in your phone. Another way to relate to a hearer, see their hearing as a truth, not the truth. There's many revelations out there from hearers that are not revelations at all from the Lord. They are from the other team. How to grow as a healer. Like I said, write down what you hear. Use the biblical thing throughout the day. Speak, Lord, I, your servant, am listening. And this is something, if you've never done that, I would encourage you to do that. Practice it. Speak, Lord, I, your servant, am listening. The enemy's not going to speak to you when you do that, unless you have really strong familiar spirits you've been listening to. Don't force your hearing on others. Share something and wait to see if they come back for more. That's probably one of the biggest rejection issues is, well, I heard the Lord say this, and the person's just kind of like, at that point, don't share anything else, because if they didn't receive what you first heard, and I see this when you're on a staff of a church, people hear all kinds of bizarre things, and you have to use discernment. If 10 people come up to you and they've heard from God, 8 of those probably didn't really hear from God. It's them projecting their hurts, their insecurities, their rejection, and that happens all the time in the church. And so that is really, really difficult when you're a pastor, because you want to love the person, and you can't just go, you have a familiar spirit, or this is what's wrong with you. You're like, you just smile and you're like, okay. If it's not resonating with them, don't continue, And I've heard over the years, different people, they're like, no, God told me to say this to them. And I'm like, which God? And they get offended, so don't say that. um, so just recap, write down what you hear, practice it. The other thing with hearers is they do tend to hear familiar spirits better than the average bear. So that's just a caution when you're, why you should write stuff down, because when you will see a pattern as you write it down to where this is clearly the Lord and this is not a familiar spirit. So there you go. So the last one, the seer. They are the dreamers, okay? And this is where you can get the cheerleader personality that's really excited about their dreams, and yet they're not able to do anything with them. We all know those people. They see clear pictures of what God is going to do. They do have an ability to see how it should be or how things can be. Most seers will tell you about a vision they had at some point in their life regarding, their family, their ministry, some major component of their life that is literally like a life-changing vision. So they tend to get visions that encompass their passion, their calling. And when I say ministry, I don't mean you're going to have a microphone and, I'm talking about whatever ministry God's called you, whether it's your neighborhood, your region, however God has called you. They tend to get visions that will actually help in that area. I've described before, I've had lots of different visions like that where it's literally like a screen opens up and it's the most bizarre thing, when it happens. But washing the dishes, screen opens up, and I literally have like a blueprint for the youth ministry that I was running and knew how to take the team I had and empower them and put them in different positions. It's an interesting thing. And then like writing it down, but usually those visions, like all the visions I've had, I can still remember them like they just happened, because that's how ingrained it is into you. And you can actually go back into those visions and look at them again, and many times God will show you more of it. Many times a vision is just like an entry point or an introduction to more, if that makes sense. Okay? As we've talked about before, visions can be external, they can be internal. You can have a dream where you have a vision in the dream. I've heard of people having visions in a vision in a dream. Anything's possible, okay? Other strengths of the seer, they see beyond what most people see. They are generally entrusted with very, very large dreams that if they told you what they were sitting on, you would think they were crazy. What they see the future holding, they would just go, I don't believe you. They tend to operate in a strong faith and longevity. These are the people who many times they've gone through some stuff, they've persevered, and it's not always been pretty. And they may be the person that somebody goes, well, do you know what this person did? Ooh, right? Because they see, and people come against that. Some weaknesses of seers: they have a hard time relating to those who don't see what they see because they think you're crazy. Seers are probably the number one folks to get kicked out of churches, especially an immature one, because they'll just tell you everything they see, and people are just like, they're overwhelmed, they don't know what to do with it. Some seers start to grow weary or delusion. I've seen seers that are off, that are prophesying the end of the world because they've seen it. They've seen like all these bad things happening. They don't realize God is actually a creator, not a destroyer, that he's not ending the world anytime soon, that the end times are not. And this is like keys. When you hear a seer or anybody say, we're coming to the end, Jesus is coming back, you know immediately, they're wrong, because Jesus isn't coming back anytime soon, okay? So it's probably not going to be in our lifetime. And sometimes that's like a big thing to say, but we'll just say, I've seen it. But yeah, it's not happening anytime soon. And usually where you can help a seer when they say the end is coming soon, what they don't realize is it's a season that's ending. Because remember when Jesus said, the end is coming, the end, and they're asking what he meant is it was like the age of Aquarius, the age that he was born, that he lived in, was coming to an end. It's a different season. So that's often what happens is, that season is ending. There's a new season coming. That's why so many people prophesied in September the world was ending, right? And it was just like, oh, Y2K, you remember that?
Yeah.
That wasn't just prophets prophesying that. That was everyone and their mother, right? So those could be weaknesses, okay? And if they have a bent for the negative, if they have a bent for the, like, loving the demonic or just coming out, and that's the other part of seers that are not believers tend to see the end like that, and they will scare people. So lots of weaknesses. They tend to have a hard time valuing the day-to-day stuff. The immature ones, they have some big dream or big vision, but they can never seem to take the basic steps of, like, having a job, staying employed, making money for the family, because they're like, well, that's a waste of time because I have this big vision, and I can think of like 5 seers that I know that have these huge dreams and visions that literally are true for their life, but they haven't been able to do the steps that take to get there, and that's why it's important to partner with people who are not like you, okay? People who are administrative. And I would say, I don't remember who said this, but I heard for every big vision or dream you have, you should probably have like 7 administrators working with you to accomplish that, because seers are not generally administrative. How to relate to a seer: ask specific practical questions, so in that vision, describe to me what you saw. Tell me, what does it mean to you? Would you like to hear what I think it means? If you think you have an insight. Help them document the vision. Again, seers don't tend to write stuff down. And encourage them. Seers need encouragement because they are the ones that are considered crazy. Okay? They need lots and lots of encouragement. And they're so confident. It's like the knower who's so confident in what they say, you think, oh, they're prideful, they're arrogant, but you don't realize they're the ones that need more encouragement than everybody else, because they're used to getting the, I don't believe what you see, type stuff. Encourage. As I said before, how to grow as a seer: write the vision down, identify priorities and core values, be accountable for your vision and moving forward. That's the big key. Is you have a vision, you have a dream, but most people, they're like, well, that's the world to write down goals, and that's the world to write down, I can tell you, over the years, I would used to write out like 25 goals, then I'd write A, B, C, D, E, F, G of those goals, and as I look back, they've all come true. Okay, that was before I even knew what the prophetic was. Okay, that's part of even gaining your own confidence, to when God shows you something, then to go after it. Okay, and I would say it's the same for all these gifts. It's just a little bit different whether you're hearer, knower, etc., etc. So that's just an overview of many of these things, but it gives you enough to chew on. So there you go.